Welcome to toy-polloi.
Hello and welcome to another video from toy-polloi, and today we're going to be looking at restoring this Hasbro 1987 Visionaries figure. This is a character called Arzon, and it was very kindly sent in by Chris Lewis, who thought it would be something that I would enjoy having a go at fixing up, and I have to say I think it will be. These are made by Hasbro, and it's got a similar construction to the G.I.Joe figures of the time. So the figure is held together by an O-ring which sits inside the body there and hooks onto this little hook on his legs. As you can see, it suffers with a very similar problem to Hasbro's G.I.Joe figures, which the pelvis breaks. The front part of the pelvis is a very thin bit of plastic and that snaps off. So you can see that when you put this together, there's a bit of a hole there that needs filling up. We've also got the O-ring, which has perished away, so the body has fallen apart. But the interesting fix for me on this one was actually on the front panel here. These Visionaries figures have lots of holograms on them. So you can see here, this is a hologram chest panel. This is not the correct hologram to go with this figure. In fact, I don't have any of the accessories to go with him, so I'm just going to be doing a sort of a mini fix today, and at some point hope to find all of the sort of proper accessories for him. But this panel shows you what the problem is. So these panels clip onto the front, and there should be a clip here at the top that you sort of hook this under and then push it in place. And you can see on this one it has snapped off and is missing, so we need to repair that as well. And I think if we do these sort of three repairs, so repair the pelvis, put the new O-ring in place and repair this clip, then the actual figure will be quite presentable, and then at some point I can find all the missing weapons and accessories for him. So the first thing we're going to do though is actually fix this pelvis, because that's the bit that will take the longest and the longest to set. And we're going to do the same process that I've shown you on G.I.Joe figures. We're going to drill a small hole into where this part has snapped off. We're going to insert a piece of paper clip, glue that in place, and then use some milliput to rebuild the missing part of the pelvis. We'll let that dry and then we can paint it to match. So let's get this first part done. Okay, so here is the pelvis. I have a paper clip and I've measured the diameter of this piece of paper clip, and I've then put the matching size drill bit into my pin vise. And what we've got to do is then very carefully drill a hole where the pelvis was snapped off. You can see there, we're going to drill a hole into that so that we can then insert a piece of paper clip and glue that in place, and that will be the sort of the substructure that we build the milliput onto. So just drill a hole. This plastic's normally fairly tough. If it's the same as the G.I.Joe ones, you have to sort of push quite hard to get it to actually drill into. But it is possible. So just drill this hole and then we'll insert the paper clip and glue it in place and sort of shape it so it's roughly the right shape, and then we can add the milliput. Okay, so you can see I've drilled a hole and I've shaped a little bit of paper clip to fit in there just to sort of mimic the original shape of the pelvis, and we are going to glue that in place. Got just a little bit of super glue here. Get some of that on the end of here and it should stick quite nicely. There's a little bit too much glue there, so I'm just going to scrape some of it away with my screwdriver like that. It should be fine. So we'll let that super glue set, and then we can model on top of that with some milliput. The piece of paper clip has now had time to set, so we can start sculpting on top of it, and I'm going to be using milliput, which is a two-part sort of modelling clay. Mix two different bits together and you end up with this, and it's quite sort of easily sculpted. It takes a couple of hours to sort of partially set and 24 hours to fully set, so you've got a little bit of leeway when it comes to sculpting. And all you'll need for sculpting is a knife, just so you can sort of cut some bits off. I tend to use a small screwdriver as well. I find that very easy for sort of making shapes with, and some water, because you can soften the top of the milliput and sort of soften the shape using some water, and a bit of kitchen towel just to sort of wipe your fingers as you go, because you don't want to sort of smear it around. So I'm just going to get sculpting and sculpt the missing part of this pelvis, and then we'll let that set, and while that's setting we can fix the rest of the figure. After a few minutes sculpting, I'm left with this, which is a good sort of starting point. I've tried to smooth it down as best I can. With Milliput, you can then file it once it's all dry. So when we come back to this tomorrow, I'll be able to sort of file out some of the rougher details. But the overall shape is exactly what I need. And by the time that's painted up, I don't think you'll even notice that that has been sort of repaired. Really, the most important part is this front section. As long as that front is nice and smooth, everything else is sort of hidden by the legs. So you can see it's a little bit rough on the inside there. That doesn't matter because you'll have the legs in place. In fact, I'll bring in the legs. We'll slot those in. As you can see, you can't actually see that far back by the time they're in place, so it'll be all hidden by the time it's painted. On the front of this Visionaries figure, you can see here that I mentioned there was this clip missing, and it should sort of clip right over the front of this chest plate. And I can see why it gets snapped off, because any child just sort of pulling forwards is likely to push that sort of clip upwards and it will break. Really, the way to remove this is to actually unclip the bottom section and sort of slide it down. So I certainly can see why that would snap off over time. And I've been in my sort of parts and spares pot of styrene, and I found this, which is some 7mm L-shaped styrene. You can buy this from most model shops. It comes in all sorts of sizes. This is 7mm because it's actually the distance between the 2 points there is 7mm, so it's 7mm square. And that I think I can use to make a new little clip. So I've already cut off a small section. You can see here, small little L-shaped piece, and that is going to fit quite nicely over the front. It's a bit long at the moment, but with some modifications that should fit quite nicely over the front. And then we need to work out a way to sort of stick it inside. But looking at the plastic of this figure, I think this is going to work very well with plastic weld, and that's exactly what this styrene is designed for. So I'm going to start trimming this down and making a new sort of clip part, and I'll show you just sort of the process as I go. So it only needs to clip over just a little way, so we can trim off most of the back of this L section. I'm going to say probably about that much. It only needs to be a small clip. So we've got something, a very small little L shape, and I have a nail file here, which is very good for just sort of filing down the edges of this, making it sort of soft and sort of smoother really. You can use needle files, but I've been finding that these nail files are particularly good, and they're so cheap. You can buy packs of them, you know, sort of 10 for a couple of pounds, and just sort of work your way through them, and as they get worn out, throw them away and buy some new ones. So I just think they're particularly useful. So we'll file that short, and you can see that that's going to clip over quite nicely, but we need to stick this, really I want to stick this on the inside, so more like that, but obviously that's not going to work. I think what we're going to do is, if we cut this end short as well, so it only goes in that far, we can then stick another piece of styrene underneath, which we can sort of hook inside. I think that would work quite nicely. So I'm going to just trim off. It's going to be a hard thing to explain, but I'll show you as I go really what's going on. Let's trim this off to about, I'm going to say there, so I'll just put a slight mark in it. Yeah, just like that. Again, we can sort of file this down. So we want to stick another piece of styrene underneath there. I'm not really sure what that shape's going to be, sort of a D or a B with the back part open. But let's just file this down a bit. Then we'll stick a piece on, and I'll show you. Now again, I'm going to use the same L-shaped piece. I've actually cut the end of this off for something else. So what I'll do is I'll just cut a length of this off quite crudely. And the plan is I'm going to stick that under there, just like that, so we end up with that sort of shape, and then we can modify that and tidy it up once the glue has set. And that should make a nice clip that we can fit into the front of this Visionaries figure. So let me get that glued, and we'll see how well that works. I've got some plastic weld here. You'll see me use this in lots of projects recently. It's been very useful. I'm going to put loads on just one side of this to start it getting a bit tacky. And we can stick this in place. Once the plastic weld had set, you can see I've now shaped it finally and made this little tiny piece. It doesn't take that long to make actually, it's just a little bit small, so it's sort of fiddly to work with. And you can see that is going to sit inside the front part of this figure, and I think we can plastic weld that in place, and by the time that's painted the same blue, I don't think you'll notice. So let's do a quick test fit. I'm going to get this front panel and sort of part put it on, and I'm going to drop that in. You can see that looks like quite a convincing clip there. So let's glue this in place on this figure. We're going to glue it all from the inside, so I'm going to have to open up the figure and we'll work on the inside of it. I think that is going to look quite nice. It's quite a convincing little clip. So here's my new little clip. I'm going to put a little bit of plastic weld just on the top of that to start getting it a bit tacky. I'm going to push that in place. And then I'm going to use my tweezers to position it from the inside. You can see that's actually not going to look too bad. So again, we'll put a little bit more plastic weld around that from the inside and let everything set, and then we can test it. Plastic weld sort of works with capillary action, so you just need to drop a little bit around the edges and it should pull itself sort of under all the edges. And this the material that these figures are made of works very nicely with it. Now that the plastic weld has had time to set fully, this is really firmly held in place. When you put a lot of plastic weld on something, it does take quite a while for the plastic to reform and sort of form a really strong bond, so always leave it for about an hour if you possibly can. We can now clip this in place. I'm going to just hold the top of that just to be extra sure that I'm not sort of breaking it as I put the thing in. But that, yeah, it seems to work really quite nicely, and you can pull that out. Yeah, that feels like a very good fix. I'm happy with that. We can go ahead and now paint it. Everything has now had time to dry and the milliput has set quite nicely. I've done a little bit of fine tuning with some needle files just to sort of shape it a bit sort of sharper, but really because you want some nice sharp corners there, so I've just managed to file those down a bit. But that is really nice and strong, as is the little clip there. That has dried really well. Now we need to paint them to match, and I'm going to be using some model paints here. This is a Vallejo model colour. This is a colour called Andrea Blue, and it's 7841, and that's actually quite a good match straight out of the bottle. Now some of this plastic is a little bit yellowed. You can see there's a sort of a tinge of yellowing there, so it may be when you do it for yourself you want to mix in some other colours. So I have a yellow here which is flat yellow, 953. Mixing those two together just adds it, makes it a little bit greener, and it should match quite nicely. Both of these are matte paint, so once it's all dried I'm going to then put a top coat on of 135, which gives it a slight sort of gloss finish. This is a clear acrylic coat, and this is a Humbrol acrylic paint. I've also got some black here just in case I want to sort of darken it down a bit, but I think straight out of the bottle this one is not too bad and certainly will match quite nicely. So I've just got a little bit of paper here with some of the paint already squidged onto it. I'm going to clean my brush because I've been mixing. We'll get some of the fresh paint and we'll just paint over this, and then we'll put the top coat on, and that should look nice. I've also used that same blue just to touch up the little bits of paint that are on the arms and hands here. You can see that he's got some gauntlets on and some little panels on the back of his gloves which are both scratched, so same blue for that. And while the figure's apart, I might as well touch up the purple paint as well. You can see there's a few scuff marks on the bottoms of his feet here. There's a few little scuff marks around the sort of the central part of the body where it rubs on the pelvis, but I think I'm going to leave those as is because that will just get rubbed off anyway again when we put the figure back together. You can see that all sort of rubs inside the pelvis. I'm not going to bother with that, but the boots certainly we can touch up. Again, I'm going to use a matte paint, so this is violet. This is number 70.960, another Vallejo model colour, and actually this seems to work straight out of the bottle as well. It looks like all of the figures from this line use very sort of primary colours, and it looks like these are a very good match. So I'm just going to paint some of this on matte paint. So again, at the end I will be adding the 135 top coat. Then the last thing we need to do is sort of touch up the bits of damage to his hair, but I think I've probably got a brown paint for that as well. But in the meantime, let's get this purple sorted. The final colour is for his hair here, which is a sort of quite a chocolatey brown. I'm going to be using some Humbrol paints for this. I've got number 70, which is a reasonably good match, but it needs to be a little bit dark as I'm adding some number 33 black. I managed to mix a colour just using those two, which is a very good match. Again, these are matte paints, so I will go over with the gloss coat afterwards, but I'm very happy with the sort of colour match on that. So I'm just going to touch up all the little scratches and bits on his hair, and then we'll do the top coat over everything and put the figure back together. All the paint is now dry, so I can just go ahead and put the figure back together. The original O-ring, as you can see here, had perished and snapped, so I found an O-ring that is pretty much the same size. It's slightly thicker, but it will do the job nicely. These are the same construction as G.I.Joe figures, so very easy to put back together. You've just got to hook the O-ring onto the little hook there that holds the two legs together. We'll push that through the pelvis, and then we can attach it into the body and screw everything together. It's a very simple process, this one, and something that most people have done multiple times. Very straightforward. So this is actually the front of the body. That's the only slight difference, is that the screw hole is on the front of the chest rather than on the back like G.I.Joe, so you have to make sure you've got the legs around the right way. But that should be straightforward. So we put those on like that, put the arms in, get the head in place, and then we'll add the screw. And here you go, here is the Arzon figure all back together. Replacing the pelvis and repairing that really does make quite a big difference. Without that, but it's fairly obvious that this figure is broken. And as you can see, the little clip that I've added there does work quite nicely. The paint matches pretty well, I think. And just generally touching up the paint on his figure, all those little wear marks on his feet and around his hands, and especially on his hair, have made him look very nice and very displayable again. Now, this is not a toy line that I particularly remember that much. It's certainly one I never bothered collecting as a child, but now having got this one and sort of worked on it, it really does quite intrigue me. I think I'm certainly going to try and track down the missing parts for this figure, get the right chest piece here. He has a staff, he's got a sword, and he's supposed to have a little sort of blue hat or helmet that goes on the top here. So I'm certainly going to try and track those down, because they are very nice figures, nicely built and nice to work on. And as I say, these are exactly the same as sort of Hasbro's G.I.Joe figures, if a little bit bigger. If I bring in a G.I.Joe figure that I'm also working at the moment, you can see how much taller the Visionary figure is compared to the original G.I.Joe figure there. So he's certainly a little bit easier to work on just because he's that bit larger. If you need to repair things like thumbs and the pelvis, there's a little bit more space to work on. But yeah, a very nice figure to deal with. So thanks again to Chris for sending this over. This has been a fun sort of little mini fix. I'm definitely now going to go and hunt down the missing weapons and pieces for this. And you never know, I might actually pick up a few of the other figures and vehicles, because it's certainly caught my interest. I hope this video has been of interest to you. If it has, then hit the subscribe button and tap the bell to be notified each time I upload a new video. And thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching toy-polloi. Subscribe for more great videos. You can also follow toy-polloi on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.